You have a chair? Excellent. People, everybody has a chair that wants a chair, that needs a chair. There's an empty one beside Ian. There's a couple in here as well. So, great. What a wonderful turnout. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Lori Brinklow. I'm the coordinator of the Institute of Island Studies here at UPEI. My office is just down the hall, along with my colleagues Jim Randall and Joan Sinclair. The Institute of Island Studies has been going since about 1985, full-time, here at UPEI the whole time. And our mission, as it says on our banner there, is to talk about being a bridge between the university and the community as one of the things that we do. We celebrate all kinds of things to do with Prince Edward Island culture, the environment, education, all of those things that go into making Prince Edward Island such a wonderful, special place. We also have an international mandate as well, looking at islands from around the world. So this lecture series, this is the first one that for 2018, you haven't missed anything, and we will be having more throughout the season, and we usually try to focus on Prince Edward Island and maybe an international island. So this month we have Will, who's going to be talking the very earliest Prince Edward Island history that we've ever done at the Institute of Island Studies, and it doesn't get much earlier than this. And then next month we'll be going down to the Caribbean with Dr. Nan Bardui. He's going to be talking about integration in the Caribbean islands, so maybe he can take us someplace warm next month. Yay, no pressure, Nan. And we'll have a few more until the end of May, and then we'll start up again in the fall. And if anybody has any ideas for a lecture, please talk to me about it afterwards or send me an email. What I'm going to do is...
Can I do the research of the Caribbean one?
Okay. I think you'll have lots of people wanting to take your suitcase with you. What I'm going to do is send around a sign-up sheet. I have a mailing list which has about 950 names on it. We have a newsletter that goes out once a month that talks about some of the things that we do at the Institute. So if you're all interested in being on it and learning about the sorts of things we're doing, please give me your name and your email address. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Will. We first heard about this story. Harry Bagwell was the first director of the Institute of Island Studies, and we were casting about last fall for some ideas, and he said that he'd heard about a film that Will was making on the earliest Prince Edward Islander. I think it's maybe the Dimetrodon. I think I've pronounced it correctly. Dimetrodon.
Or Dimetrodon, it's not particular.
Okay. It's not going to come back and haunt me or anything if I make too many mistakes. All right, good. So he had heard about it on CBC, and so I got in touch with him, and he said, sure, he'd be happy to do it. And so, go ahead. So we're just absolutely thrilled to have him here. He will tell you a little bit more about himself, documentary filmmaker, actor, researcher. Take it away, Will.
There's way more people in here than I was expecting tonight. It reminds me of a really terrible joke that my better half has heard me use far too many times over the years. Did you hear about the vegetarian who died? There was a big turnip at his funeral. Why don't oysters give to charity? Because they're shellfish. So I can't do any worse than that no matter what I say. I started making Prehistoric PEI about 5 years ago. Now when I say making, I don't mean filming. I mean I started thinking about it around late 2012, early 2013. And when I started making it, I didn't realize two things. One, that PEI's history was as old as it is, 300 million years old, as Larry pointed out to you in the preamble, and that it would take so long to make one little 4-part web documentary. But here we are 5 years later, and in about a month's time, the first episode will come out, and tonight you'll see the rough cut of that. So, with that first episode, you'll see the opening salvo, the core, what's driving this documentary and what drove me to make it. And that's basically 4 questions. The first of which is what sorts of fossils people have found on PEI. And the documentary will explore that. We'll explore a little bit about that, in the slideshow. The key thing we put in this lecture together, so I didn't want to spoil the documentary. So I had to work really hard to avoid that. And another question is, are people still finding them? Every now and again we get a news article about a fossil being found in Cape Egmont, like Herpetonyx arsenalatorum was a few years ago, or a PEI Dimetrodon skull being found in the 1800s. But what isn't reported are the smaller fossils, little but extraordinary finds that people find practically every year. And those are things that don't get covered in the news, and I wanted to see if people were still finding them. Another question is, will we ever get a museum to share them in? This is the biggest one so far, and it's one that I'll be talking about in the documentary and here as well. And another thing I want to touch on, I didn't simply want to ask questions and avoid. I wanted to find a proactive way to make this documentary a proactive thing, make it a voice for change. So of course that leads into my fourth point: how can we make a museum happen here on the island? So that covers the documentary. For purposes of tonight, we're going to talk about 6 things here. When I got the idea to make Prehistoric PEI, we sort of covered that, late 2012, early 2013, but there's more to the story than simply that. And that leads into how I filmed it, who I met while making it. Some of those people are actually here tonight. Kathleen Romans, Linda Nobles, Chris Ruprecht, and others, and Claire Perry as well. And where I went to film it, and that was basically everywhere all over the island, and some places very far away from here, which we'll get to in a few moments. Why I made it in the first place, well, we'll get to that too, and what I learned in the process. Now, I'm not from Prince Edward Island. I'm originally from a little town called Seabright in St. Margaret's Bay, Nova Scotia. Now it's part of the Halifax municipality. When I was a kid, it was a little fishing village out in the sticks, basically. And we used to buy our fish from a fishing shack like 100 other families, and that shack is now gone. One thing that hasn't gone are the rocks around Peggy's Cove, sitting where they've been for the last 20,000 years since the Ice Age deposited them. And I used to spend a lot of time out at Peggy's Cove, and one thing that used to fascinate me was the fact that the rocks, if you've ever been to Peggy's Cove, how many, show of hands, how many in here have been to Peggy's Cove? The majority of us have been there. I mean, you look at those rocks, they don't look like they were put there yesterday. They're deeply carved and strewn all over the place, these massive Volkswagen Beetle-sized boulders. And I used to be fascinated as a kid by the forces of nature, the forces that were necessary to put those rocks there and to carve into the earth the way that those glaciers did. And I used to imagine what kinds of creatures used to live around there. So, aiding and abetting this was my mother's steady diet of dinosaur books that she would feed me pretty much every night before bedtime. As you can tell, these are pretty old school dinosaur books. Most of the kids in here are more familiar with the more plantigrade T-Rexes you see now since Jurassic Park, which are more lean forward. These are the old style dinosaurs where they drag their tails. And they were full of beautiful artwork. And they were the sorts of things that just feed your dreams when you're a kid. And I had to say, that's one thing that always seems to cross generations, is an appeal for dinosaurs. Another thing I had access to was the Nova Scotia Museum of Natural History. I had access to one of the best provincial museums in the region. Now, these days, the Nova Scotia Museum of Natural History on Yonge Street in Halifax, it's just one segment in a larger chain of museums in Nova Scotia that includes Joggins and Parsborough and other places. But when I was a kid in the late 70s, early 1980s, it was basically the center for everything from fossils to pioneer handy tools. So I had regular access to this. My parents were friends with one of the curators, and my sister used to go to Stamp Club in the basement every Saturday. So every weekend from about 1980 until about 1982 or 83, I was in there every Saturday, and I could still find my way around there blindfolded. But encompassing the stories that my mother read me from those books and access to real fossils and things in the museum, it was a really enriching environment as a kid. And the other thing too was that marine room used to scare the tar out of me, but we'll get to that later. Now, oops. Oops. You're not allowed to see that yet. Now, I left Nova Scotia for PEI nearly 20 years ago, and I came here to work for a web design firm and eventually for the phone company. And before I left, my cousin Chris, who is an amateur astronomer, showed up at my door one night around 2 o'clock in the morning with a bucket of coffee and this fossil. And that is a 300 to 305 million year old seed fern that he found near Wallace River, Nova Scotia, on a canoe trip that day. And that little red marker there shows you just how close that is to Prince Edward Island. Now, in a lot of ways, that was kind of the first clue of what I was going to find eventually here, were fossils of about this age and of this type. But at that time, there was no indication that that there was ever going to be follow-through on this. At that time, it was just a cool paperweight that my cousin brought me as a going-away gift. So, there we go. Now, the thing is, I had mentioned that that fossil was approximately the same age as other fossils found on PEI. That makes sense because once PEI was part of Nova Scotia. It was part of a supercontinent called Pangaea, which people keep saying someday should really get back together and do some cover tunes. Actually, in the Parsborough Museum last summer, I ran into a group of tourists. I think they were from Ontario, and they were very, very intense looking, and I thought I'd kind of break the mood a bit. And they were looking at an interactive map of Pangaea, and I went up and I whispered, you know, there's a rumor they're getting back together again. They just glared at me. The stand-up career never took off. So, anyway, we were once part of this massive supercontinent called Pangaea. As you can see from this map here, all of the continents in the world were mushed together. Nova Scotia and PEI were not separate entities. We were all one big, happy, muddy, windswept, Mad Max wasteland-like family. And that was the world of 300 million years ago. And we were part of modern-day Morocco, and we were on the equator. And actually, one of the big sorrows for me with this documentary is I never did raise enough funding to go to Morocco to research the PEI connection, but it's probably just as well. I'd probably still be over there. Anyway, the Pangaean supercontinent broke up about 175 billion years ago and carried its fossils with it. Beg your indulgence here for a moment. Now that leads into my next bit. When I moved here, I didn't pay much attention to PEI fossils because I didn't think there were any. I heard a whisper from a friend of mine back in 2001 who was taking a program at UPEI, I believe it was Island Studies, who said that she found mention of a PEI dinosaur, and I kind of, yeah, right, whatever. So time passed, and then around 2010, I found an old copy of the Island magazine dated fall-winter 1992, and is written by the UPEI registrar and geologist John DeGrace. He's no longer a registrar, he's now a geologist out in British Columbia. But basically his article has a beautiful rendering of a Dimetrodon, which is a sailback reptile from about 290 million years ago that we're going to talk about in a moment. And he described basically how in 1845 in New London, a farmer named Donald MacLeod was digging a well. His shovel hit something, he turned it over, and what he thought was an ordinary rock was a piece of skull from one of these beasties. Imagine his surprise. Letters were sent out, correspondence sought, And John William Dawson, one of the fathers of maritime paleontology and geology, came to have a look. And he, in turn, passed it on to Sir Joseph Leidy, the father of American vertebrate paleontology in Philadelphia. Now, it's been in Philadelphia ever since. Leidy took the fossil down to Philadelphia with him to the Academy of Natural Sciences, which is now part of Drexel University in central Philadelphia. In those days, it made perfect sense to send it there because he was the world's leading authority. It was the center of the geological and paleontological world at the time. So if you had a fossil, you sent it there for identification. And if you didn't have a safe way of storing it, well, they would take care of it, they would buy it, and look after it. So it's there, but what they did do was strike at least one plaster cast replica. And the article talks about one. As you'll see in the rough cut coming up in a few minutes, I got quite a surprise when I went to look for it. So I won't talk about that just yet. Now, a Dimetrodon, as I mentioned, is a sailback reptile. What's really interesting about it is that it's about as closely related to dinosaurs as you and I are. It's a synapsid, which means it's a mammal-like reptile. Now, the scientific classification for a synapsid is basically it has orbits behind its eyes, which are basically like a ventral opening or a temporal opening. So that differentiated from dinosaurs that don't have that. Mature, they were roughly 2 to 3 meters in length. Just based on speculation, the fossil fragment found in New London was probably of a juvenile creature, about 1.5 meters or so. Probably the main body part would probably be about 2 or 3 feet off the ground, from the bottom of the feet to the top of the back. And that sail fin would probably bring it up to about here. So it's nothing that you could really keep as a pet. It's a meat-eating carnivore. It lived all over North America. Fossils have been found in Montana, they've been found in Texas, a few in Western Canada, but basically it's a North American creature that lived during the Permian period. So you're looking at about 299 million to 251 million years ago. Now, that's a long time before the dinosaurs, because as some of you in here may know, dinosaurs didn't come along until probably about 90 to 100 million years later. So between the time that this fellow lived and dinosaurs, there was a mass extinction event, probably caused by climate change, changes to the environment caused by the continents drifting apart, Pangea breaking apart. So the Dimetrodon's days were definitely numbered when that started to happen. And of course, eventually in time, small little bird-sized animals came on the scene, filled their ecological niches, and then the first dinosaurs were born. Now the Dimetrodon is basically PEI's star fossil. It's the second named fossil ever found in Canada. It was featured on a beautiful silver coin that I'm very happy to own, even though I couldn't really afford it, because it was a limited run. In 2013, the Royal Canadian Mint did a Canadian Dinosaurs series of coins, which if you were very, very well off, you could buy one for each province. I just got the one for PEI, and the photo doesn't do it justice. It's a beautiful laser-etched rendering. And Canada Post, just 1.5 years ago, had a Dinos of Canada series, which featured the Dimetrodon very, very prominently on the front cover of the main brochure. So it's definitely a creature of some note, even though, again, it's not a bloody dinosaur. It's been called that. The one thing that I found while making this documentary is, and something that has been brought up, is that there's now a pretender to the throne, but for the time being, the Dimetrodon is basically our star fossil. Now there's a bit of a name discrepancy here. It's labeled in scientific literature as Bathognathus borealis. Now basically, I'll explain it like this. When the first fossil of a species is found, say Tyrannosaurus rex or Diplodocus, or pteranodon. Whatever the scientists on hand name it at the time of its discovery becomes the name of that species ever afterward. For instance, if a T-Rex skull has already been found and I find another one, I can't call it Bobosaurus or whatever, it has to be T-Rex. That's how scientific nomenclature works in this case. So a bit of a weirdness, discrepancy happened with Bathognathus being found and named first, before other Dimetrodons were found, but for some reason the name Dimetrodon stuck to the species, and while Bathognathus, the island Dimetrodon, is a Dimetrodon, it's not called a Dimetrodon. So to cut through the confusion, a few years ago, some scientists at the University of Toronto and the Royal Ontario Museum, who had the skull up from Philadelphia to do CAT scans, decided that enough was enough, just stop calling it Bathognathus borealis, name it what it is, a Dimetrodon borealis. We can't change the species name to Bathognathus. So Kirsten Brink, who I've been talking to since 2014, wrote a letter to the International Commission of Zoological Nomenclature, that's a mouthful, to rename the specimen as Dimetrodon borealis. And although a lot of people are now calling it that because it's just a lot clearer, it's still up for discussion. And Bathognathus borealis, by the way, is Latin for deep jaw of the south, which does not refer to its tobacco consumption. Now, we'll just branch out here into exactly why, what about me makes me qualified to make a documentary about all this. I'm, after all, very clearly not a scientist, and I hadn't really done much filmmaking before. So my background is basically this. I have a journalism degree from King's College, back in the days when we still used videotape for everything, and shot everything on film if we were photographing. And I never really stopped doing that. I've done a series of short web documentaries just to experiment with the form. And I found with web documentaries, and especially with technology available now, if you know what you're doing, and with very little money and effort, you can make a really nice looking piece of video. And people are doing it all the time. YouTube, Vimeo are full of really amazing amateur films. And the technology's just made it available to make and distribute them for peanuts. So I experimented with it and made a documentary series a few years ago called Arts on PEI, which about half of Charlottetown was in at one point. Anyway, I made 7 of those just to experiment, bring my journalism skills up to snuff, and I never really stopped doing photography. I took shots of fossils. I continued to have a passion for fossils. So it was never anything I really gave up on. So basically, I had criteria for making this. First, the film needed to be of high quality, even though it could be made for peanuts. Second, the film needed to be entertaining, not just a collection of talking heads, because frankly, that's really, really boring. I like a show rather than tell philosophy when it comes to things. And since I was making this not just for grown-ups and scientists, but for kids as well, I wanted it to be entertaining. So the film, and with that in mind, the film also needs to be educational. It needs to have some real quality content that people can use to actually learn from. And it needed to finally be financed from funding sources, not out of my own pocket. Because the difference between a film, an amateur film, and a more professional product is basically where the money comes from and how much of it you're able to allocate to the film. So some filmmakers will say, well, you should never use your own money. I disagree with that because a lot of investors want to see that you have confidence in your own product. So I put a little bit in, but basically most of it came from outside sources. Now, I had some disadvantages, obviously, because I wasn't working for a news organization. Nobody knew who I was. I had no crew, minimal feature filmmaking experience, cheap gear, no budget. But I'm a bulldog when I want to do something. A real snapping turtle. I wasn't going to let go of the idea. I had my own gear, and this is basically what I shot it with. This camera, which I had pointed down so no one would think I was photographing it. This is all I used to shoot the documentary with. And, but it's not much, but you can run away with it and shoot whenever you need to. And I know how to knock a story together. And I had a passion for the project. And that, at the end of the day, is the one thing that matters. Because I had to tell you that when I started working on this, I had no idea, as I said at the beginning, how long it was going to take or how difficult it was going to be. And there were a few weeks, sometimes even months, where nothing happened, where I was struggling to put food on the table. And at moments like that, you just really want to throw in the towel on something. And if you don't care about something, you're just not going to follow through on it. And there were times where I would just look at this camera and say, I just really, why am I bothering? And then I remembered the things that my mom had taught me when I was a boy, the things I'd grown up with access to. Thought, gee, you know, kids around here should have access to that as well. And, you know, this is something I'm really interested in. And that passion carried me through some pretty dark days and nights. Can't emphasize it enough. Raising money, one thing I learned was that you can have the best idea in the world, but no one is just going to give you money for it. So I wrote a lot of applications for grants, got a lot of rejection letters, but as you can see, I put a little halo over the NFB's symbol, because eventually a very nice lady named Alexis Bullman, who some of you may remember a few years ago, she did a documentary about Rainbow Valley. She came up to me one day in my darkest despair and said, you know, there's a filmmaking assistance program that the National Film Board offers. And it's not much, but really you're not talking about an expensive project here. So why don't you apply for that? So on her urging, after 12 rejections I wrote from other firms, I wrote the NFB. They said yes, although it took them about 8 months to say yes. And it was like the sun broke through. It was like the first glint of sunlight on ice, really, when that happened. So that made it possible to finish this documentary. The other thing that made it possible was a crowdfunding campaign. And for that I had things like glass pendants with the Dimetrodon skull made out of PEI sea glass. An island toy maker made little stuffed cuddly Dimetrodons. And eventually, when the website is launched, I'll probably be selling those again, so keep your eyes peeled. So the NFB funding paid for animation. I went into this with the mindset that I wanted to hire new, fresh talent that was students, because I remembered my own experience as a student trying to look for work, and it was bloody difficult to get hired. And if you did get hired, it was really difficult to get paid work. So I thought, well, no, if you have a skill, if you have a special skill, you deserve to be paid. So with the money that NFB gave me, I got some really great animation of what PEI looked like when Dimetrodon lived, done, and of the Dimetrodon itself. And that was put together incredibly quickly in under 2 months. 2 minutes of animation were done. And I was able to get a local composer to Craig Dodge to do the theme music. Filming continues without a budget, part 1. This was a bit before the NFB gave me money. I realized that if I was going to do this, I was just going to have to go and do it. A filmmaker friend of mine told me, don't wait, just do it. So out I went with the camera, photographing and filming everything I possibly could for basically the price of gas money. And of course, along the way, I met some really amazing fossil collectors, like Care Fortune, who found several footprints about the size of my hand in the cliffs at Belfast. And of course, Kathleen Romans, who is here tonight, who has continually been finding a fossilized tree bark from the coal age around 300 million years ago on T Hill Beach. Those are just a couple of people I interviewed. Probably about a dozen people overall. When the money came in from both the crowdfunding and the NFB, I was able to kind of spread my wings a little bit, and these are some of the examples of things that I was able to film. And you'll notice there's far fewer of those shots than there were previously, but you know, quality, not quantity. finished filming in just about a month ago, actually less than a month ago. What I shot was the opening credits sequence and some final scenic shots and local interviews with fossil collectors. So basically, probably from the start of shooting up until the ending, we're probably looking at about close to 2.5 years since I started filming this documentary. So these things definitely take time. I just never realized in the beginning how long it was going to take. But the thing is, when I started making Prehistoric PEI, it was only ever going to be about the Dimetrodon. But as I found, many more fossils besides Dimetrodon have been found over the years. And these fossils occasionally pop up in the news, and it turned out Dimetrodon was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. So the money from the crowdfunding allowed me to do something that I've been meaning to do for close to 2.5 years at that point, which was drive to Philadelphia and have a look at the PEI Dimetrodon skull that's been sitting in the Academy of Natural Sciences since 1854. So I was aiming to raise enough money to fly down, not so lucky, so I did have enough from the crowdfunding to drive down. So one morning in early September, I hopped in my little Kia Rio and drove about 1,500 kilometers over the course of 2 days to get to Philadelphia, a city I've never been to, and stopped in Boston overnight each way, and came back in less than a week. And it was a slog, I've got to tell you, but it was absolutely worth it. My main memory of my return is basically stopping at my cousin's house on the way back. She lives in St. John, New Brunswick, and she's a minister, a United Church minister. And she was telling me how she had found a book left by her predecessor that said How to Stay Out of Hell. And I said, you know, that's easy, just avoid New Jersey. I can't emphasize that enough. They say the Soviet Union is dead. Have a look at the New Jersey Turnpike next time you're on it. The Academy of Natural Sciences. Founded in 1812, it's the oldest natural science research institution and museum in the Western Hemisphere. It's also among the most important paleontological institutes in the world, and it's famous for its fossil collection, world famous. There was a Tyrannosaurus rex that I did get some shots of. Unfortunately, I was given complete open reign of the institute, except for that one room with the T-Rex in it, because they were remounting it and they didn't want this 20-ton skeleton falling on the visitor. So I did get some shots from far away. I have to say they left me alone with this fossil for several hours. I had been worried going down that they were going to be very closed-mouthed about it, that they were going to be very, no, you can't have a look at it. They couldn't have been more open and accepting of having someone just show up at their door with a couple of weeks' notice and have access to it. One guy with a little camera. And it couldn't be more well looked after. I had a number of people beforehand saying, well, why is it in Philadelphia? Well, one, they bought it, they own it. Two, it's really, really safe in there. It's in a climate-controlled room in a padded drawer, and basically, it's incredibly small. The picture doesn't get across just how small this thing is. The circle that my hands are describing right now is how big this fossil is. So I was allowed to film it for hours, and they answered every question. Dr. Ted Deschler, who's the lead paleontologist there, very patiently gave me an hour of his time to do an interview, and you'll see that in the upcoming episodes. Now I know we're coming up on time here, so I'll skip through the next few. I said I stopped in Boston both ways, going down and coming back. I stopped on the way back for fish. Specifically, I stopped because, can everyone tell me what the one thing you're guaranteed to see on PEI's beaches in the summer is that you at least want to see? What is it?
Jellyfish.
There we go, jellyfish. While I had the chance, I never bloody got jellyfish on camera. And when I finally realized I should probably have jellyfish in the documentary, because they're about 450 million years old, which means they would definitely have been in the water when PEI was part of Morocco, I never thought to get any footage. So looking around, it occurred to me, well, I'm in Boston, the New England Aquarium had a jellyfish tank. So I paid $40 in downtown parking, American, to go in for 2 hours and film some ruddy jellyfish. Now, the other thing that they had was a 3-foot-high, get this, a petting tank for stingrays and sharks. Yes, you could put your hands in and pat stingrays. I want to emphasize the word sting in that name, stingrays. And I was trying very carefully with my waterproof camera, which you can buy in any Shoppers Drug Mart, by the way. I was very strict. I didn't know if I'd be allowed to photograph in the aquarium. I was kind of hiding like this, taking pictures. And then a curator came up and said, "Is that an underwater camera?" And I said, "Yes, yes it is." "Well, why don't you just put your hand in there and shoot?" I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I actually got some really amazing shark and ray footage. And I have to say, stingrays, despite the name, are incredibly affectionate. There was one that wouldn't go away. It kept coming up and flapping against my arm like a puppy. So it's very cute. While we were filming, just this past July, I and Max Stimpson, who's a geologist in training for the province of New Brunswick, found on a cliff 12 feet in the air, hanging upside down, some Amphisauropus, say that 5 times fast, Amphisauropus tracks. Again, about the size of my hand, keeping in mind I do not have large hands. In such detail, you can actually make this out the skin folds in the toes. And this is basically an artist's rendition of what that probably looked like. It would have been a lizard probably about 1 meter, 1.2 meters long. Probably not something you'd want to keep as a pet either, by the way, but there we go. And looking at about 300 million years old, 300 to 290 million years. So around the same time as Dimetrodon. China Point was the biggest surprise. Dr. John Calder, who, by the way, is senior geologist for the province of Nova Scotia, and is responsible for the Joggins fossil cliffs being the attraction that they are today, invited me to China Point back in July, just outside Stratford, to have a look at some fossils that a friend of his had found. Walk a couple miles up the beach and you're going to find fossilized tree trunks from the time of Dimetrodon. These probably would have grown in the field that the PEI Dimetrodon walked through, these leaves. And if you look at some of the holes in the cliff face, you'll find bits of fossilized tree trunk. And of course, because I was short and pretty agile, I was able to get up there and get those shots. No one else could, so I came in handy. So basically, where for now? Well, editing on all 4 webisodes is happening now. What you're going to see tonight is basically what I have on my hard drive, and rudimentary doesn't begin to describe the narration, but I promise you that when it's done, it's actually going to have a lot less talking in it. The official Prehistoric PEI website will be launched in early March with the webisodes, all 4 of them, month by month. Will be starting in late March. The website, I'd like to have some special content on there. Basically, one thing I really want to do is inspire kids to become scientists themselves. So I asked each paleontologist I interviewed about what inspired them when they were young to want to get in the field, and what kids can do to do what they do and dig up dinosaurs and stuff. So those probably won't be in the documentary, but they're extra little things I thought would be nice for a website. And I'll have some nice photos, including hopefully some 360-degree VR photos of fossils that have been found. That's one thing I did with Dimetrodon when I was in Philadelphia, was I had it on a turntable. Not a turntable, but a Lazy Susan turntable. And I just kind of rotated it, and hopefully I can make a decent 360-degree panorama of that, so you'll be able to, if you have Google Glass, you can go in there and have a look at it. So hopefully when it's done, I'll knit it together into one 43-minute short feature and trot it out to festivals. But it will always be available on YouTube for everyone to see. So the official website's live. Right now it's just very rudimentary. If you go on the Facebook page, you'll get all the latest news. So, and these are just a couple of the very common fossils you'll find around the island. Walkian conifer bark. Calamites, I can never get the name right, which are basically ancient horse tails.
Calamites?
Calamites. And I've heard so many different pronunciations from so many people, it's just really hard to get it right. Calamites, calamites, calamites. Yeah. Tomato, tomato. And of course, I'm going to make this available. I was talking with Lori Brinklow about making this available to everyone afterward through their website. I'll put it up on Facebook as well. This is what to do if you find a fossil. Generally, they don't, it's not recommended by people in the PEI Museum Authority that you remove stuff, but since our beaches are so crumbly, you really don't have much of a choice. So if you find a fossil, and if it looks like the piece of shoreline it's on is going to crumble apart if you look at it wrong, your best bet is to pick it up, save it, remember where you found it, or take some pictures and get in touch with any of these people. Contact the PEI Museum, New Brunswick Museum, Nova Scotia Museum, any of these people. And I'll make sure that all of you have access to this later, because I have a feeling it'll probably come in pretty handy. So, despite my halting delivery and my obvious inexperience of delivering a lecture, I want to thank you for your patience, and I want to thank everyone who supported this project over the last few years. I couldn't have made it without you. So, if we have time, I want to reward you for your patience with the rough cut.
In 1995, a young boy found a fossil along the shore of Egmont Bay. The fossil made the news. The boy became famous. What he pulled from the rock and red earth lived on Prince Edward Island roughly 300 million years ago. Urbitonax arsenaltorum, named after the boy who found it. This little beast got a lot of people talking. Did dinosaurs really once live in this little province? Could there be more fossils like this waiting to be found? Had anyone ever found anything like this on PEI before? And if so, where could you go to see it? Dinosaurs are long gone now, but we clearly love them. They pop up everywhere, even where you least expect them. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World. This 1925 film brought dinosaurs back to life for movie audiences. Long before Jurassic Park, it showed what living, breathing dinosaurs might have looked like, and what they might do to our cities if one ever got loose. The film became a massive hit. Decades later, dinosaurs can still fill a theater, raking in millions of dollars for Hollywood. Museums bring us closer to the real thing. Even this small collection can draw in huge crowds. Dinosaurs went extinct over 65 million years ago. They ruled the Earth nearly 180 million years before that. Can we do as well, one wonders? Dinosaurs can't really come back, but if you know where to look, you can find prehistoric life all around you today. Dragonflies the size of seagulls filled the skies long before the first birds took to the air. Miniature descendants of prehistoric plants now cover the forest floor. Sharks and their relatives started out over 400 million years ago. Jellyfish have been around even longer, although lots of us wish they'd go away. Snakes shared the earth with Tyrannosaurus rex, looking much as they do now. As for the mighty T-Rex, some scientists say there's more than a little of him in the modern chicken. Of course, people don't talk about prehistoric life when they talk about PEI. They talk about Anne of Green Gables and her beautiful house in Cavendish. They come to play a round of golf, to take in the island scenery, check out our seaside towns, and see our many, many lighthouses. I can certainly tell you about lighthouses. I grew up near a famous one. As a kid, I spent a lot of time at Peggy's Cove, wondering, wishing, dreaming about the future, and the distant past as well. I also spent a lot of time at the Nova Scotia Museum of Natural History, where I learned just how old this world of ours really is. I also lived in fear that the giant whale statue in the marine room would one day fall on my head, or maybe one of the turtles. Nova Scotia is proud of its fossils, and it's easy to see them. Pull over along the highway near Stewiacke, and you can have lunch with Marvin the Mastodon. Visit the cliffs at Joggins, and you'll find fossils all over the beach, ready to be studied and shared by anyone who finds them. It's hard to imagine PEI having anything to compare to a place like this. I trained to be a photographer or journalist and left Nova Scotia for PEI. I thought I'd left the world of fossils behind me in my home province, but an old issue of the Island magazine showed me differently. Back in 1845, a farmer in New London found a piece of Dimetrodon skull, around 290 million years old. Scientists sent it to the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. It's been there ever since, but a plaster cast made from the original remained. The Dimetrodon's an old friend of mine. I knew him from the dinosaur books my mom read to me as a kid. I never dreamed one would show up on PEI. I wanted to learn more. A friend helped me get in to see the field where the farmer found the fossil. It looked just like any other field, pretty, green, but no sign of anything special. I needed more. I needed to see the replica. The UPEI biology department has a room full of fossils. This place is a treasure trove. The replica skull is there, of course, 3 of them, in fact. What really took my breath away are the cases and drawers full of fossils, dozens of them in all sizes, all carefully labeled, all carefully stored, many from PEI, and many from the writer of the magazine article, geologist John DeGrace.
Well, I wrote the article in my own time because at that time I had just started as the registrar at the University of Prince Edward Island. So that was my evening and weekend work. I only retained one fossil that I had here, and that was one I collected myself. All the rest of them, most were donated, and I always felt that I was the custodian of the collection, not the owner of the collection. So that's where when I left for British Columbia, virtually the entire collection stayed behind. You always will find a lot of things in Prince Edward Island. Remember, the coastline is eroding at an average of a meter a year. So that means that you can walk along those shores every spring and see fossils that were not there the year before. The most prolific area was on the west side of Point Craig. And there were all kinds of plant stems and trunks there. That's also Point Craig was the area where a lot of trackways were found later on, although I didn't find any person there.
Point Prim on PEI's southeastern shore. It's famous for its lighthouse. You'd never guess that fossils would be found here, but they have. We'll get back to them later. Down the shore at China Point, Dr. John Calder tells me a bit more about the world that these fossils came from.
Almost 300 million years ago, the shoreline at Earnscliffe, China Point, would have looked much, much different than today. In fact, if you had been transported back in time, I dare say you wouldn't recognize it. The trees would be different. The sun would be in a different position, straight overhead. We'd be sitting right on the equator. There'd be no grasses. The ocean would be far, far away from us. We'd be in a dry land setting, trees that were quite different from today, cycads, tropical vegetation, Walkian conifers, and the creatures would have been entirely different as well. There'd be no birds singing. If you did encounter a creature, it would be something that you might want to run from. And we were not an island at that time. We were part of the center of a giant landmass. Think of the outback of Australia. This is more what PEI looked like in those days. And what is now across the Northumberland Strait at Brule, Nova Scotia, was a few miles across that, if you want to call it a dry wasteland. And so it was really part of the same ecosystem, the same landscape. And that is today, of course, where we find fossils, footprints of such creatures whose bones have been found in Prince Edward Island. And it's not surprising because it was all part of the same landscape.
I visited Brule, Nova Scotia. There in the Tatamagouche Heritage Centre is the world of the Permian period in miniature. Could Herpetonyx arsenatorm have left these prints behind? How about the PEI Dimetrodon? He seemed to get around.
Bathognathus, or Dimetrodon, is clearly the most famous of PEI's fossils. But if there's a potential usurper to the throne, that would be Erpetonic's arsenaltorum, which was found in Egmont Bay. It's an exquisite fossil, and it also is the first of its kind that was ever found in the world. So here you have two major finds of ancient reptiles that were the first of their kind in the world. And you know, it's quite remarkable, and most people don't realize that here on PEI, on this little island, we have such an important fossil record.
Two important fossils, and much more besides. Erpetonic's arsenaltorum, Dimetrodon or Bathygnathes borealis. But what else has PEI got up its sleeves? All the books in the world, or in the public library, wouldn't answer my questions. Are people still finding fossils, and what have they found? Will we ever get a museum to share them in? How can we make it happen so the scattered bits of prehistoric PEI can find a home? Digging deeper into the story behind our homegrown Dimetrodon might yield some answers. So back I went to the Permian period, 290 million years ago. Back to the age of the first islander.
See more of that, you're going to have to wait 2 months. Not finished footage all over the place, a bit rough, but thank you for that. It's been a long haul to get here. If I can do one quick plug, Dr. John Calder has a book coming out in a few months from Nimbus Press called Island at the Center of the World, which is all about prehistoric PEI, but not, the documentary Prehistoric PEI. It's all about PEI and its prehistory, not my documentary. And while the two projects, his book and my film, are connected, we've been tossing research material back and forth to each other. So I just thought it'd be good to kind of mention that. I think it'll be a really good book, and I think it'll go into a lot of things I'm just not going to be able to go in depth on in the documentary. So definitely consider it.
Any questions, Will? Lots to think about there, lots to comment. Yes.
What's that? It's just that, the eye logo, it's just that, I noticed that if you look at it the way, you can notice that it kind of looks like a person going like this.
Yeah. It's, are you referring to the logo for the product, or are you referring
Like the...
Oh, sorry, the National Film Board. I thought I meant the Prehistoric PEI logo. Actually, I think it's meant to be like this. I see you like an eye, okay, because it's a film company. Cool shirt, by the way. You got like a rib cage shirt on. It's pretty cool.
Actually, it's glow in the dark.
Yeah, awesome. Man. Do they make them in adult sizes?
Don't turn the light.
Any comments? Anybody found a fossil here that you'd like to mention? Yeah, you found a fossil? In England.
That's pretty cool, man. We would have been right alongside England. It's not really that far from home. Think about it. Did you bring it with you? Oh. I think we all would love to see that sometime. You'll have to put pictures up so everyone can see it.
So the king of fossils so far is one with the whatever you call that.
The sailback?
Sailback. Now, what do you think? What's the sailback?
Dimetrodon.
Thank you. What's the other? What was the first name?
Bathygnathes.
So what do you think it had? What did it serve?
Its function? That's a really good question, because no one is 100% certain exactly what that sailback does. If we can, I'll just open up the slides for a moment. We can have a look at our good buddy Mathognathus Dimetrodon. Come on. All right. Now, that sailback, some scientists believe that it could have been used as a way to cool down or heat up. For instance, if you look at the show, how many of you in here have seen Walking with Dinosaurs?
I've watched that
Yeah?
show like 4 times.
And of course, there's another part to it called Walking with Monsters, which goes even further back and has an entire episode about the Dimetrodon. In that show, they kind of speculate the best guess, which is when Dimetrodon wakes up in the morning in that episode, it's cold and sluggish, so it aims its sail fin into the sun to warm its blood up. And when later in the day when it's hot, it aims it toward the shade to cool down. Now, another function that it could have served was as a mating display like peacocks have, where they flush their feathers out. There's a really cool sequence in that show where, to ward off predators, the Dimetrodons flush their sails full of blood to make this creepy-looking eye shape. So that's another speculative function. Another theory that's just been floated in the past couple of years is that it may not have even had this flap of skin between the bony spikes, that it may just have had spikes sticking out, covered with a thin layer of skin. So unless we can find a way to clone them, a la Jurassic Park, it's open to speculation exactly what its function is, or even how it looked. We'll have to wait and see.
Do you have any advice for someone who'd be interested in making a documentary? That's a pretty, wide-angled question, but...
Don't give up, even when people tell you that you should. Make sure that you have a solid, rock-solid idea before that you have something that what you're pursuing is something that you really believe in. Because it's tough as heck, unless you're getting paid well for it. It's really tough to spend the time. Like, I couldn't have spent 3 years making this if I didn't care about it. There's a documentary made by a filmmaker named, I see your hand there, I'll get to you in a second. There's a documentary made by a guy named Rob Stewart. It's called Sharkwater. I don't know how many of you in here saw it, but he's a Toronto filmmaker. He died this past year. He made a documentary about the state of sharks being fished into extinction. And he always maintained that if he had had to make the documentary about canaries, he would have given up on it, as soon as he hit the first roadblock. Don't let roadblocks throw you off. You're going to get rejection letters no matter how good your idea is. Just keep at people. Be a bulldog and keep at them. And like Rob Stewart said, basically if it's about canaries, don't fret it. But if it's something you're really passionate about, it gives you carte blanche to be as tenacious as you want to be.
Did your scope change?
Yes,
from
it
the
did.
beginning? Yeah, I was going to say, because it's so difficult.
It grew. If I had known, I'll tell you all right now, if I had known how big this was going to get, because like I said during the lecture, this was originally just going to be about the Dimetrodon, and it wound up being one small piece of a larger puzzle. I don't know if, I think I still would have made it, but I would have definitely done my preparations differently. I would have sought out funding before leaving the workforce for a while. I definitely would have planned it out a bit differently. But J.R.R. Tolkien once said in the opening to one of his Lord of the Rings books, that the tale grew in the telling. And I think you'll find that true of most subjects. It looks like one thing on the surface. You dig deeper, and boom, the whole world's in front of you. So it definitely grew. You've been waiting patiently for minutes.
It's just that, no offense, but I'm starting to think maybe you should get a new animator.
I think that William and Jordy did a really good job with that. They're going to be really really hurt when I tell them that? I don't think so. Well, I'll tell you about the animation. We didn't have time or money to do a photorealistic BBC Earth, BBC Walking Dinosaur style documentary. So there's this music video. I'm a bit of a metalhead. I like Metallica. There's a really cool music video for one of their songs called All Nightmare Long that's done like a Soviet, 1950s Soviet animated propaganda film. And it has a kind of ultra-fluid, shadowy rippling effect on it. And I said, okay, we have 2 months to make this animation, and we're not going to have time to do photorealistic. That would take about 6 months to a year. Let's take our cues from that. So we looked at some actual Soviet propaganda animations. We looked at the Metallica All Nightmare Long video. I showed them clips from Journey to the Center of the Earth, which is a 1959 film with iguanas dressed up as Dimetrodons. Of course, the way they scaled in that film, they were the size of this room and growled a lot. But I even got down at the floor at one point and acted out the part of the Dimetrodon, just to get it in. So a lot of work went into it. So yeah, it's not going to look photorealistic. I'm sorry about that. Next time, I promise. But the best solution with the time and the money was to go for a bit of artistic finesse with it. So that's what we did. Yes?
Well, yeah, a couple of questions. One is, are you looking at putting this out to public groups and getting them to go to public lectures and things?
Do you mean if I'm looking at doing the lecture circuit with this?
Yeah.
I would like to. I think when the documentary is out there and it will be on YouTube and everyone can have a look at it, I think having it out there will probably help a great deal because I won't have to lay so much groundwork when I give the lectures. Ideally, what I'd like to do is show the film and then do the lecture, because then we can kind of talk about what we've seen. So definitely, yeah, it's something I would like to do.
How does one get a hold of you?
Well, I'm on Facebook. If you go to the Prehistoric PEI Facebook page, that's probably the easiest way to get.
And on your website as well, you'll have contact
Yes.
info there?
Yeah, if you go to I have a website called smashthatcamera.com, because quite honestly, sometimes when you're a photographer, you really do want to smash that bloody camera. That night, didn't want Will Beckett's photographies. It sounds lame. If you go there, there's a contact form. But definitely Facebook, I would say, would probably, Prehistoric PEI on Facebook, just Google it. I'm also on Twitter. If you look for Will Beckett on Twitter, I'm on there.
And Dan, I have his email address.
I only give that out to good people.
He's a good person too.
Good little boys and girls.
Yeah.
One other question is the crowdsource funding and the National Film Board, how much money were you able to raise? Or is that confidential?
I don't want to say exactly how much money I raised, because it sets an expectation. I'm going to say that it was less than you probably hope it is, more than you thought it might be. The best answer I can get, it was hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Yes?
First off, let me congratulate you. You're being really modest. You're a terrific speaker.
Can I brag about being modest?
Very, very, very captivating, and especially for the youngsters, as you can see, they seem to have been enthralled with your presentation.
They remember all the dinosaur names.
So anyway, so you've set the bar very high for those of us who will be coming after you in terms of this lecture series. That having been said, you mentioned that this creature was in fact a precursor to the dinosaur. You indicated that it's not really a dinosaur as we understand, at least lay people understand dinosaurs.
Actually, it's more of a precursor to us than to dinosaurs.
Right.
Basically, what happened was, as I said during the lecture, this thing had mammal-like characteristics, but it wasn't a mammal. But neither was it a full-on reptile. It's just more convenient to call it a reptile. It just happens to look like a dinosaur. But As dinosaurs eventually became birds, although birds, you can't trace a direct line from the chicken to the T-Rex, although it's definitely got some genetic material in it. The things that eventually became mammals came from this. Around the time of dinosaurs, there were small, itty-bitty mammals running around that had lizard-like characteristics, and eventually those evolved to become primates and whales and tigers and every mammal you can imagine, and eventually became us. So really, yeah, there's definitely more of us in this fellow than the T-Rex. Whereas one person said, if you had a time machine, go back in time, ride your ancestors. Definitely don't.
My question is, you indicated there was a climatic event and...
An extinction event,
right,
yes.
right. But you sort of breezed over that. What exactly, I mean, we all hear what brought the dinosaurs down, if you will. But what was it, as I said, you breezed through that. What was it that brought this particular creature to its untimely death, I suppose, or end?
I breezed through it because less is actually known by people who know better than I do about that extinction event than with the dinosaurs. Because the dinosaurs, there's more recent evidence of it. There's the evidence of the meteorite crater having hit around the Gulf of Mexico. There's rock strata that show the volcanic ash and such. With the Permian extinction event, before dinosaurs came along, the one that killed this guy off, they have some strata evidence of climate change, essentially the climate becoming colder, and of course it is PEI and the parts of North America that supported this fellow drifted away. You lose that warm equatorial climate. So whatever was keeping this creature alive in terms of flora and fauna and weather, it was getting colder. It wasn't, the temperature was going from Australian outback to upper Ontario, and it couldn't survive the change. So yeah, it's something, it's really tough to give an exact answer on that, and I'm sorry if I breezed through it, but it's really tough to get a firm answer on it. That's the best one that's been floated, so. Did that answer your question? Okay. Yes?
Actually, in regards to the various extinction level events, Bill Nye, in his Bill Nye Saves the World series on Netflix, does a really good explanation on the 6 different mass extinction events. So if you want, you can check out Bill Nye Saves the World on Netflix, or Mike Flax.
But, anyone else? Yes, you.
Just curious, over a period of 300 million years, how do these get buried and how far down? Are they like down 6 feet or 20 feet, or how deep was that well? Any idea?
Well, this little guy's skull was probably down around 12 feet. So what happens over time is, even if we're not on the edge of a tectonic plate, the Earth, over hundreds of millions of years, shifts and buckles and warps and cracks. You know how frost bubbles form under pavement in the winter, and then in the spring we're left with potholes. I mean, imagine that happening to entire landscapes over the course of eons. Mountains rise and fall, the rubble covers the ground, new ones rise up, the ground thins, and oceans sweep in and vanish, brushing away Earth that's been there for millions of years like a broom. So fossils like this, it could be at a certain, if you're in a fairly stable plateau, it could be at a certain depth, and then you have places like the Badlands in Alberta where they're practically right on the surface, even though they're 70 million years old. So it's really variable. It's really variable. I'll tell you one thing though, when I was a little boy, when I was 7 years old, we went to Birmingham, Alabama. There was a really cool museum in Birmingham. It's still there, called the Red Mountain Museum. Now, the cool feature of this museum was they actually had the mountain cross-section. It wasn't really a mountain per se, it was more like a huge hill pretending to be a mountain, but it was actually cross-sectioned in places because I guess highway workers at one point had dynamited it, found all these fossils, and basically thought, money, and turned it into an attraction. And it's frozen strata. Does everyone here know what strata is? I'm talking about strata. It's more than, it's basically, strata are layers of rock built up over the years. You can have like a dark layer. It's rock that's been, it's kind of compacted earth that's petrified and become rock. And it builds up in layers. So the bottom layer is, say, the Cretaceous period. Then you have the period after that, and the next one after that, built up in layers, like a layer cake. So you have these various strata in this mountain, and as you walk up the mountain, you're passing millions of years of evolution. So, in a case like that, yeah, you'd find Triassic trilobites halfway down the mountain as opposed to the top. But in other cases where it's loose earth with bits of rock in it, it's going to either appear at the bottom of the milkshake or at the top. So, yes?
It's just that I was wondering, why are the Badlands called Badlands?
Well, you can't grow anything on the Badlands. It's basically just sand and blasted rock. You can't. They're called bad because it seldom rains, and what rain does fall is not enough to nourish the earth. It's earth that's been leached of its nutrients, so that's why it's called bad. I see a fellow back there with his hand up.
Oh, why is it called Dimetrodon?
Dimetrodon means 2 rows of teeth, double rows. I think that I've never found a significant answer for that one, but it has something to do with the way that its teeth are formed. So that it's another Latin name. Yes?
You realize we could keep you here all night.
I'd be fine with that as long as you all brought coffee.
That wasn't my question. So do you think it's possible to find any type of dinosaur, any variety on PEI or around the island?
Well, that's a good one. The young fellow who found the Erpetonyx arsenalatorum, his name is Mike Arsenal, by the way, I didn't mention that in the documentary. He had just finished watching Jurassic Park with his friend, thought it might be fun to go see if they could find a dinosaur. Half an hour later, on the beach, they find this little lizard that no one had ever found before. But because of the age of our rocks here, and because this part of the Earth was so heavily populated 300 million years ago, and because our soil and our rocks are from that era, that's what you're going to find here, is stuff in that 300 million to 290 million year age gap. The chances of finding, say, a little baby T-Rex or something here are pretty remote. But in Nova Scotia, they did find prosauropod skeletons from the early Triassic period, several dozen million years later. So never say never. A geologist would be able to answer that better than I could, but so far the accepted wisdom is to be in the Coal Age or the Permian period. So, that answer that? Or?
Yep, thanks.
Yes?
What was your favorite part of filming?
What's my favorite part of filming? My favorite part of filming was the bit that I talked about with the petting tank in Boston. Simply because I really thought I was going to get kicked out of the aquarium. I had tried, and I always do try to get permission before I go and shoot somewhere, and I tried for weeks and months to get permission from the Boston Aquarium, and they never got back to me. And again, as I said in the lecture, I don't have the backing of a news organization behind me, so I can't say, hey, I'm Will Beckett at the CDC, and have them open doors, and it's like, who's Will Beckett? Don't bother calling him back. So I kind of snuck in with my camera, and I really thought I was going to get turfed out, but as it turned out, they were like, oh, hey, yeah, go ahead and shoot. So it's like, okay. So I did, and anyone who knows me knows how much I love sharks. It's a little scary how much I love sharks. So actually getting to pat sharks was really cool. They're just little ones, but that big. That was awesome. And I can't say enough about stingrays. They're so puppy-like. They're amazingly like puppy dogs. If you ever get a chance to visit that aquarium, definitely check that tank out. That was my favorite. That and finding the footprints in Belfast. That was cool too, because I was right there, and Matt Stinson was just showing me where he had found some footprints about 5 years previous. And we went onto that beach without looking. This was the beach below the Belfast Highland Greens golf course, like right below the golf course. And we were walking along, and he was like, yeah, this is where I found, oh, holy moly, there's more footprints, 12 feet in the air. So I actually got that on film, which I never expected to get. And then we were trying to scale up that cliff, which if you've ever been there, it's constantly falling apart. Bits of rock are constantly raining down on you.
And golf pins. And golf balls.
Yes, there were golf balls everywhere. But what I ended up doing was I ended up getting Matt and his girlfriend, assistant Olivia, to kind of hold me a bit while I was aiming the camera up, and I was sort of about 4 feet in the air, kind of clinging on with one arm and trying to focus the camera with the other. And of course this horsefly comes along. And I'm wearing shorts. And I thought, okay, it's buzzing around my legs and like nudging me, and I think I'm just going to let it bite me, and it'll go away, and I'll be able to get my picture. And it wouldn't go away, it just kept tickling my legs. And every time I show that picture, people are like, the white balance is off. I was like, white balance is off? I'm amazed I even got it. White balance is off, yeah.
How did dinosaurs get there? How did people choose how dinosaurs got their names? For example, T-Rex, was it like after the person's name, or did they?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, Rex is Latin for king. And when they found Tyrannosaurus Rex, they thought, well, look at the jaws on this thing. It's definitely got to be king of something. So they gave it a name that had king in it. And of course, Latin is used, for a dead language, Latin does really well, I must say. They use Latin because it has a very broad alphabet, and you can use it to name things. And that name can carry across to people who speak French, or people who speak Russian, or people who speak Japanese. But the way that they choose names, well, first of all, you heard one version in my lecture where I basically say when they find a fossil, they give it its name, and every one of that fossil kind of afterward keeps that name. But the way they choose that name is they just look at it and they think, well, Tyrannosaurus means tyrant, basically. Tyrant king.
I also have another question.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, if you remember what it is in the next few minutes, you just go ahead and go, well, like that, and don't wait for me to look over, just go, well, and I'll answer you. How's that sound? All right.
In the meantime, there's one just over there too.
Hello.
Since we're talking about fossils and stuff, what's your personal favorite dinosaur?
Oh, the big T-Rex.
Yeah.
I also really like Tylosaurus. I've actually got a picture of Tylosaurus in here somewhere. Let me call him up here. When I was in Saskatchewan a few years ago visiting the same cousin who gave me this fossil, basically I got to see a Tylosaurus. And basically a Tylosaurus is like a big waterborne snake.
I saw that picture.
Yeah, I'm not getting anywhere going this way, so I'm just going to call it up here. So yeah, I definitely got two favorites. I'd have to say T-Rex overall, though. It's just really cool. Yeah, I'll call this one up and you can have a look at it again, because I'm going to breeze through it really quickly. That's a Tylosaurus right there. That's actually the provincial fossil of Manitoba. Is the Tylosaurus, Mosasaur. Waterborne snake, got flippers on it with limbs. Very cool animal. That, by the way, is a prosauropod that was found near Parsborough. That's a replica of its entire skeleton. At the spot they only found part of its leg, but that's a full reconstruction. So, again, it's...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's the official fossil of Manitoba. Is this the official fossil of PEI, or we've not named it? Or should we?
We should. In my opinion, we should. Only 2 provinces have official fossils. Nova Scotia has these, say this 5 times fast, Hieronymus lyelli, which is a little itty-bitty lizard from the Carboniferous period, which was before Dimetrodon. Little lizard about that big. They found its skeleton in the remains of a tree trunk. And that's the provincial fossil there. Manitoba's got that. We should have the Dimetrodon. We really should. Everyone's got a provincial flower, why not a fossil?
Well, there's the Albertosaurus.
That's true. I have pictures of him, actually, I should put in the documentary.
Maybe we we should start a petition
Yes, exactly.
for that and a provincial museum.
This could start the ball rolling. Official fossil and application for museum.
Well, look, it's the official fossil because it's been in the Dinos Canada stamps and it's been on a lovely coin. So it's unofficially official. So.
Wait, I'm just wondering, why does bone last and cartilage doesn't?
Good question. That's a really good question. Why does bone last and cartilage not? Okay. First of all, that's going to get into a much tougher answer than it would have been about 20 years ago, because a few years ago, T-Rex bone material was found that actually had the remains of soft tissue inside of it, and they were able to extract not enough DNA to clone, but enough DNA to link it to modern animals,
Yeah,
like
I
the
saw
chicken.
that.
Yeah, and dinosaur mummies, like an ankylosaur, were found, which aren't really mummies in the dry skin, leathery, dead body Egyptian type, but are mummies in the sense that the impressions of soft tissue and the shells are left. But bone itself doesn't really survive it. The whole process of fossilization means that over time it mineralizes. So the bone, it looks like bone, it's really stone. You know this, right?
I know.
Yeah, it's funny. Do you know the two kinds of fossils that you'll find?
Well, there would be flora and there's also fauna, but there can also be bacteria or troglodytes.
Very true.
But actually, but troglodytes kind of count as fauna.
Trilobites look an awful lot like today's horseshoe crabs. Basically, there are trace fossils, which are impressions left in sand and mud, like those footprints that I showed you earlier. And then there are, I forget the actual name of the bone fossils, the ones that are actually mineralized bone. So those are the two types of fossils that you'll find, are trace fossils and actual mineralized bone and remains. You got it.
What happens if two types of dinosaur are related to each other, but if someone finds a piece of both, but they're both named different things, decided by the society, then what happens if I find out that there's a type of dinosaur with dinosaurs were related to each other?
Yeah, basically what you're saying is exactly what's happened with the PEI Dimetrodon, where ours was found first in all the land, named Baphognathus. Another one was found elsewhere in Texas, and instead of being named Baphognathus like it should have been, it was called Dimetrodon. What ends up happening is basically what's happening now, where it's being put up for debate.
I think there's one last question right there.
If you had to keep a dinosaur for a pet, what would it
Chris Ruprecht there in the center here, he makes really amazing dinosaur statues. He's a genius. He has made a really incredible statue of Compsognathus that would be my ideal pet dinosaur. So, yeah. It's kind of little and bird-like. You can really see birds coming from that, when you look at it. So that would be, I tend to go for the really small, sleek dinosaurs. I don't know why. Probably because there's something, maybe it's because I can see the bird coming out of them, like how birds evolve from them. It's really funny, once you see how dinosaurs evolve from birds, you never quite look at a parrot the same way again. It's a little unnerving, actually.
Well, we won't tire you out, as much as it's been fun to hear all the answers to everybody's questions, especially the short people here really appreciate. I have a gift, a thank you note. It's not a bag of potatoes.
Oh boy, actually I love a bag of potatoes.
I know, they come in handy when you're a poor filmmaker, don't they? I want to, on behalf of everybody here, thank you it's a cookbook of island recipes from around the world, 60 different recipes.
The PEI Museum and Heritage Foundation down at Beaconsfield House had this amazing guidebook on island flora and fauna, as you put it earlier. And it has a bit about PEI fossils in here, so if you're down there, see if they have a copy of it, and it has a little bit about the PEI Dimetrodon as well. So definitely worth checking out if you're down around Beaconsfield sometime.
And if anybody, so islandstudies.com is where our website is. In the next few days, I'll have the video. Mike's been filming Will in this presentation, so it'll be on the website as well as the slide with all of the contact info. I'll make sure that that's on our website as well. So, and if you need to send me an email, I'm just Brinklow, BRINKLOW @upi.ca, or just IIS @upi.ca will get me as well. So thank you very much, and hopefully see you all March the 20th when we will have Dr. Nan Bardui talk about the Caribbean. Thanks again, and safe home, everybody.